Today, we're diving into source material that explores a deeply confusing, often silent psychological phenomenon. Why do you still feel emotionally unsafe around someone who is, technically speaking, perfectly nice? The text points out that sometimes the people who make our nervous systems feel the most on edge aren't cruel at all. They're polite, they're helpful, they can be incredibly calm and even loving. But despite all those great qualities, you might find your body tightening up around them. You catch yourself mentally rehearsing your words before you speak, second-guessing your own emotions, and leaving conversations feeling just strangely drained. It's profoundly confusing because, on paper, nothing bad actually happened. No yelling, no insults, no big dramatic fight, just a quiet, lingering tension. The source explains that emotional unsafety is usually so much quieter and far less obvious than we realize. We're taught to associate being unsafe with aggression or volatility, but the text argues there's a very specific, acute kind of loneliness that sets in when you just cannot explain why someone makes you anxious. This cognitive dissonance becomes incredibly heavy, especially when everyone in your life thinks this person is just so solid and good. It leaves you holding this quiet, internal alarm bell that nobody else seems to hear. To really ground this, the source introduces a case study about a couple named Maya and Ethan. The text explains that Maya carried around this deep, heavy guilt for feeling that exact unexplained anxiety. Her boyfriend, Ethan, was remarkably thoughtful in all the visible ways we're told to look for. He remembered birthdays, he opened doors, he sent her a good morning text every single day, and he never, ever raised his voice. By every standard, measurable metric, he was the picture-perfect partner. Naturally, her friends absolutely adored him. The text mentions they would often tell her, honestly, he seems amazing. But the source points out a painful irony here, that external validation actually made Maya's internal confusion worse. Every time someone praised Ethan, Maya started wondering if maybe her own perception was completely broken. Because whenever she sat across from Ethan, there was this undeniable tightness in her chest that she just couldn't articulate. The text describes it not as outright fear, but as a rigid caution. Her nervous system was constantly monitoring itself, making sure she didn't take up too much emotional space. The author uses a specific Friday night dinner to show us exactly how this subtle tension operates. Maya and Ethan were at a dimly lit, romantic Italian restaurant. Ethan is talking calmly about his week, and Maya is nodding along, but her mind is stuck on something she desperately wants to say. Earlier that week, Ethan had casually dropped a line during a mild disagreement. He told her, "You're too emotional sometimes." The text notes he said it lately, almost like a joke. But the underlying dismissal in that comment just lingered, heavily, in Maya's mind. So, halfway through the meal, Maya finally brings it up. The text describes how carefully she approached it. She asked, "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" Ethan smiled politely and said, "I'm not defensive." Maya gave a nervous little laugh, trying to keep it light, and said, "Okay, I guess when you said I was too emotional the other night, it kind of stuck with me." And the source describes the pause that followed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was just long enough for Maya's stomach to drop. Ethan just leaned back and said, "That's not what I meant." The text highlights a really profound shift in that exact moment. Maya immediately felt herself retreat. She backed right down and said, "Oh, okay." And Ethan, with his tone perfectly calm and completely controlled, replied, "I was just saying it's hard to talk when everything becomes emotional." Suddenly, Maya felt deeply embarrassed for even opening her mouth. The author points out the wild contrast here. From the outside, the rest of the dinner looked totally fine. They talked, ate dessert, walked to the car, but internally, Maya felt distinctly smaller. This brings us to a major psychological reality from the source text. The truly confusing thing about emotional unsafety is that it doesn't always arrive through malice. Sometimes it arrives through subtle, persistent emotional dismissal. It happens when you feel repeatedly misunderstood, in conversations where your emotions are technically allowed in the room, but they're never actually welcomed or held. Over time, your body notices this pattern, even if your logical brain keeps trying to excuse it. Emotionally unsafe dynamics often hide right behind a shield of niceness because, as the text emphasizes, visible kindness is not the same thing as emotional openness. The source elaborates that true emotional safety means your nervous system is relaxed enough to be honest without anticipating shame, rejection, or a sudden freezing chill in the room. Many people who appear incredibly calm are actually emotionally unavailable in very subtle ways. They aren't trying to hurt you, but they are terrified of emotional depth. When faced with your hurt or your needs, they unconsciously deploy tactics to pull away. The text lists these out: minimizing, where they brush it off, correcting, where they focus on fixing the literal facts rather than hearing the feeling, intellectualizing, where they analyze your pain like it's a debate topic, or just becoming colder, withdrawing their warmth entirely. Now, the text makes an important clarification. These partners aren't doing this because they don't care. They do it because your emotional vulnerability triggers a profound, unmanageable discomfort inside of them. Usually, it stems from being raised to view emotions as instability. In these dynamics, there's no clear villain. There's just a draining feeling that you have to manage yourself perfectly to keep the peace. And the heartbreaking result, according to the text, is that emotionally sensitive people start turning that discomfort inward. They take the blame. They think, I'm overreacting, or I'm too needy, or I should just keep my mouth shut. This is one of the most profound takeaways from the source material. I want you to really hear this. Emotional safety was never supposed to require self-erasure. Real emotional safety feels fundamentally different in your body. In a truly safe dynamic, you don't leave a conversation feeling ashamed just for having a feeling. You don't feel quietly punished for your honesty. And crucially, the text points out, you do not have to constantly analyze someone's tone, desperately scanning for microscopic signs that you upset them just for having a need. The text maps this out visually as the cycle of subtle shutdown. It's a loop that slowly trains your nervous system. Step 1, you express vulnerability. Step 2, your partner unconsciously deflects by intellectualizing or minimizing it. Step 3, left completely alone with that unresolved emotion, you turn the discomfort inward and blame yourself. The source explains that the human body is incredibly wise. It recognizes this pattern of unpredictability long before your logical mind can explain why you feel so incredibly lonely in the relationship. The source brings this cycle right back to Maya. Once she started really paying attention, she realized this pattern was everywhere. It wasn't just during arguments. If she expressed pure, bubbling excitement, Ethan stayed cool and detached. If she was overwhelmed and crying, he got visibly stiff. And if they had even a minor conflict, he'd immediately snap into sterile problem-solving mode, entirely bypassing the emotional connection she was actually starved for. The narrative in the text reaches a huge turning point. Maya is sitting in her car one night after another isolating conversation, and she finally asks herself the core question of this explainer. Why do I feel emotionally lonely with someone who's technically nice to me? The author notes that just asking this question shifted everything. Not because she decided Ethan was the bad guy, but because she finally stopped dismissing her own reality. The text highlights that this kind of radical self-trust, actually believing what your body is telling you, is the quiet beginning of real healing. The source emphasizes that this shift doesn't mean you just walk away immediately. It changes how you engage. A few weeks later, the text shows Maya trying a totally new approach. Instead of getting defensive or over-explaining, she just spoke her honest truth. She told him, when I share emotions, sometimes I feel like you tolerate them instead of actually being with me in them. And that vulnerability changed the room. According to the text, Ethan looked confused, then went very quiet. Finally, he admitted something he had never said out loud. He said, I honestly don't always know what to do with emotions. Growing up, nobody talked about feelings unless something was wrong. The source explains that because emotions meant danger in his childhood, Maya's feelings felt like a test he was failing. For the very first time, Maya saw the truth. Beneath Ethan's perfect composure wasn't confidence. It was profound discomfort and a deep, aching fear of inadequacy. The author is careful to say this didn't magically fix their relationship overnight, but it created a bridge. The source suggests that real emotional healing starts the moment we stop staring at the surface behavior and start seeing the protective patterns underneath. People protect themselves in so many ways. Some use anger, some use silence, and some use logic, perfectionism, and unshakable calm. But underneath that emotionally guarded behavior is exactly what Ethan felt, a deeply rooted fear of vulnerability. The text tells us that elevating a relationship out of this cycle requires intentional work. It means building a mutual self-awareness, breaking those negative protection patterns, and step-by-step developing true emotional safety. The source material actually points to specific resources for this, referencing the book Harmonious Marriage for those wanting to dive into transforming relationships through self-awareness, and another resource called Mantras of Love, which blends timeless principles with practical guidance. Both provide frameworks for taking that essential next step toward mutual healing. As this explainer of the source material comes to a close, it asks us to completely reevaluate our baseline definition of a healthy relationship. The central realization here is that emotional unsafety does not always sound harsh. Sometimes it sounds perfectly polite. Sometimes it hides right behind well-meaning smiles, held open doors, and a calm demeanor that's actually masking a deep inability to truly connect. The material leaves us with one incredibly empowering thought. Relational healing often requires finally trusting the quiet discomfort your body has been trying to communicate to you all along, even when everything looks fine on paper. It asks us all to reflect on a vital question. In our own lives, how often are we ignoring the quiet alarms of our nervous system just because the person sitting across from us happens to be smiling?